Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a webinar about IAM, CSPM, and how are they related to compliance. These are terms that are very, very popular today, becoming a top priority or still are a top priority for many organizations that are running cloud environments. And today we wanted to make some sense into these terms and see how they are related to one another and how they can help us to have a more compliant and secured cloud environment. Today with me, I have my great friend, Marina Segal. Marina is the CEO and co-founder of Tamnoon. Tamnoon is a new stealth mode startup. You will be hearing a lot about them in the future. Marina and I have worked together in the past at Dome 9 Security. This is where we got to know each other and got a closer look at the cloud security industry. Other than that, Marina is doing a lot of work, including establishing a chapter of Women in Security chapter at the Bay Area. So let's get started first and foremost, hearing from Marina about why do CSPM now. So Marina, let's move over to you.
How important it is to protect the environment, because a lot of the misconfigurations are basically the customer's fault and could have been prevented. That's the most important part. We can make sure that we are protected, but it's complicated, and we'll explain why. As you can see, there is a website that talks about or visualizes all of the biggest breaches that happen over time, and the time scale is going from bottom to the top, and you can see that over time breaches become more dominant, much more significant amounts of data are getting breached, and also there are more of them. And this happens because we have more data in the cloud, and we have bigger data sets that are stored in the cloud environments. And there are more companies that use the cloud environments. So I was thinking about, why is this happening? Why is that fact that we use cloud making the breaches to become so dominant? And while you are getting dizzy here on this slide, I think it's because the security of something that is moving is extremely complicated. And cloud security is definitely one of those moving targets. And security practitioners need to adjust to this new reality of something that is moving that needs to be protected. So just to emphasize, why is it so complicated, and how is it moving? So I found this screenshot of AWS from back of 2014. This is how AWS was looking. So basically, a handful of services, maybe a dozen here, that can be displayed on one page, and it's pretty straightforward. They have storage, they have compute, databases. While in 2021, just the compute part of it is one page. So think about how many services AWS has developed, and each one of those services has its own variations. EC2 these days has dozens of different options. And as a security practitioners, we need to be on top of all of those developments at all times to know how to configure them properly. And that level of complexity gets us to the point where we have a very limited visibility. We cannot protect something we don't know about. So that visibility is one of the key components of security and protection of the cloud environments. Shira, what do you think about that kind of a thought on the visibility?
Well, just in your previous slide, you showed how many new AWS services are being released Actually, by the year, we see dozens of new services. And I think that this is one of the reasons why we can't have that visibility that we always wanted, because there are so many different new AWS services, but AWS themselves are not providing us with a good visibility service. So we actually find ourselves struggling to understand out of the charts that we see in their UI, how many S3 buckets do we have, or what kind of roles do I have in my account? So figuring out what kind of permission model we have just by using native services is practically impossible. And we've seen companies trying to crack the visibility into the cloud from the days the public cloud became public. And still today, we find this as a struggle. We still see security practitioners working with charts and always being surprised when they connect to Solva or to any other security product. In that sense, finding resources they were unaware of. So I think that unfortunately, this is still a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge.
Yeah, to me, it always reminds of, think about how we were living without Google Maps. And, if we had all of the addresses somewhere in the yellow pages on paper, would that give you the visibility? Probably not. So yeah, on top of that, sharing is caring, but sharing the responsibilities in building your environment and protecting it is extremely difficult, because every type of service has different expectations based on the responsibilities and who needs to do what. And it makes the security professionals wonder, is it my responsibility? Do I need to encrypt that S3 bucket, or maybe AWS is responsible for that? And for companies who are still somewhere in the beginning of their cloud journey, it becomes even more complicated, because they are still trying to figure out the cloud, and now they need to figure out the security of the cloud. So that adds to that moving target slide, and why is it so difficult? To add a little bit more complexity, if that was not enough, our workloads, they are changing drastically. If we started, about 10 years ago with the bare metals and virtual machines, which was already complicated enough to protect. Now we have containers that spin up and down all the time. They can go away for a second and then come back up. And there are lots of them. All of them have different technologies, different orchestrators, different infrastructures hosting them. And on top of that, we also think that, maybe the functions is the next thing, and the serverless part of functions, where you only manage it with IAM permissions, is another level of complexity, right? Shira, I hope you also kind of experiencing that level of complexity when you're talking to your clients.
Absolutely. This is something we constantly see. The requirements are changing because the types of workloads and the architecture that we build out of them changes. I recently had a conversation with a client that said that because they want to give the freedom to the developers to decide how they want to build their application, the security team was surprised to see a component running in a container using COBOL, the coding language. So giving the freedom to the developers and also having such a dynamic environment doesn't prevent from surprises and even security issues. And yeah, it's very, very popular.
So let's talk a little bit about, what are those misconfigurations? What can go wrong with all of this chaotic environments. And I've picked the top 3 that, getting the Oscars today. So of course, the winner would be the unsecured bucket. And just by, Googling it, I actually have had this slide for 5 years back, and there were additional 5 screenshots. And today, by just one simple Google, I found 10 more. So I picked the ones that had a bit better pictures. But basically, the unsecured S3 buckets in 2022, we all know that we have to protect those buckets, and we're still making those buckets unprotected, unencrypted. We do not enable logging on them. And this is one of the most silliest mistakes, right? Now, another winner here is the network access rules. We are letting the attackers get into our network by just forgetting to close those ports, so leaving those administrative ports with inbound rules, or leaving them with unrestricted access to export something, to the egress access to the world. And that lets attackers to get in pretty easily. They use scanners. There are a lot of automation that those guys are using, and identifying those open ports is pretty simple. You can just Google, give me the script of network scanning for open ports, and you can just become a hacker yourself and get into those open ports. And another silly thing is to leave those security groups that no one is using in your system. It makes just the job of attackers extremely easy when they can just attach themselves to something that is already there. Yeah, I guess nothing new here. It's all those same misconfigurations we talked about for the past 5 years, right? And the last one, I would let Shira talk about it because it's her favorite topic.
It is my favorite topic, and I'm really sad that you're giving out the misconfiguration Oscars to the same two, I don't want to say boring, but really not that innovative misconfigurations. I had hoped people would come up with more interesting things than leaky S3 buckets. But the fact that we keep on seeing those buckets accessible over and over again, we joke about it, we continue our lives, but then we find them open again, means that we, the users, we have a problem. It's not the S3 bucket team's fault. They really tried and did their best to create a UI that by default leaves the bucket closed, not connected to the internet. And we still managed to open it just for 1 minute, forget to close it, and do it with the most sensitive data in our organization. As for the network access, people say that network is no longer the perimeter in the cloud. And this is a good build-up to the slide that you just shared, because if network is not the perimeter or not the main perimeter, then what is? And the cloud providers are trying to teach us how to use IAM, Identity and Access Management. Even though this mechanism existed before the public cloud was, the cloud providers are trying to teach us to use identity and access management as the main mechanism and not to trust IP addresses because they frequently change. So they've created this mechanism that allows us to define an identity for every cloud asset and to declare what is this asset allowed or not allowed to do, and who is it allowed to do it with. It sounds very romantic, and you would expect that people won't mess it up because they can create those identity and access management policies by themselves, or they can use AWS managed policies. I will say something about it in the next slide, but theoretically speaking, the solution is here. But what do people do? They go for the wild card because it's the easiest. Can you put another click? They go for the wild card. And I just mentioned the AWS managed policies. So people say, well, you know what? I don't know how to do it really well. I'm going to use the AWS managed policies. If our audience, if someone is not very proficient with AWS, you can spin up new cloud assets and attach them with roles and policies that AWS wrote. They are very generic, but it's better than not using them at all. Every now and then accidents happen. We're all human. And it also happens to AWS. So just a while ago, by accident, AWS added to one of their managed policies for S3 bucket a permission for the support team to read items out of S3 buckets that has this policy. So I'm not saying not to trust AWS, but I'm actually saying don't trust AWS. I mean, they're doing their best, but this probably means that using managed policies is also not good enough, and we need to come up with something else. We have to accept the fact that right now, IAM is the right mechanism to do dynamic security with. It's no longer network, and it's not about keeping your S3 tightly closed, because the cloud is dynamic and your application is dynamic. So we need a better way and more automated way to do IAM security in a way that fits each application uniquely. And we're going to see how to get it done in a few minutes.
All right, so we did the build-up. We kind of explained why you need to care about cloud security posture management. Now, let's talk a little bit about what it is. So just before I share the slide, posture management is think about your physical posture. You need to, do some preventative health measures in order to be healthy, right? You need to go to your annual checks, you need to do some workout, you need to do blood tests. No difference with your cloud. You have to do a lot of preventative things in order to keep your cloud in a good shape, right? For it to have a good posture, you need to do some prevention. So it's all about how would I make sure that my cloud is configured properly. Pretty simple. So there is a process that you can think about that is, ongoing, that helps you to protect your cloud. First of all, you need to gain the visibility, right? We talked about visibility. In order to protect something, you need to know what it is. The next thing would be, okay, let's get the definition of what is the good posture. What is that right policies that you need to have in place in order to protect it. And that is the scoping of this process, the selection of your regulatory or compliance or best practices frameworks. Then you would compare your configurations to this best practices or definitions that you've selected in the previous step. And then you would think, okay, so if I'm running it on my entire infrastructure, probably some of the pieces of it are not relevant. Probably some of the best practices that I've defined have some exclusions to it because I have some mitigating controls in place, or maybe because there is not really a sensitive data in there. So you need to go over your findings and start kind of cleaning it up. And then you're setting it up to run on a continuous basis. And the last step when you're figuring out how to run it on an ongoing basis is also, okay, if there is a real problem that I've identified, what would be my process downstream to remediate that? It can be manual, it can be automated, it can be semi-manual, but there should be some level of automation there, because as you have seen in the beginning, it's a moving target. You cannot deal manually with something that is highly automated. So you need to think about this continuous process all over and over again that will run for you and make sure that all of your assets are being configured properly. A lot of people come to me and ask me, okay, which compliance framework is the right one for me? And I've created this slide. I think when I just moved to the States, maybe 10 years ago, it's still relevant. I use it all the time to explain people what they need to understand about compliance framework. In the end, all of them talk about the same stuff. They all talk about how to protect your cloud environment. The difference is about who wrote them. And if we are looking at the descriptive to prescriptive kind of a scale, we can understand that the less prescriptive ones were written by lawyers because they have very little knowledge about the technology and how. And the most prescriptive ones were written by people who are hands-on the environments, the practitioners themselves, that have very little understanding about how to govern and how to legally make sure that the companies are in charge. So this is my scale of descriptive to prescriptive. And my hypothesis that have been proven over and over again is that if you implement the most prescriptive framework first, you address the entire universe of the rest, at least by 80%. So the short answer start with CIS, the long answer start with the prescriptive one that makes sense for your environment and just customize it over time.
Marina, I think this is a very important tip because this question is something people frequently ask, where to get started. So I think this is a super important tip for our audience who are just getting started with their compliance journey.
Yep, and you know where to find me and Shira, and we will help with anything else. Now, what's going on with the CSPM? How? The next question would be how? Where do I start? Not necessarily from the compliance perspective, but where do I even start the process? What tools do I need? And the answer is, it depends. There are a lot of types of CSPM solutions. There are a lot of ways to implement that, and there is no wrong or right way to do it. It all depends on what your company needs and is able to achieve with the resources you have. So first of all, I've seen a lot of great implementations using homegrown solutions where, companies just decided that since they only running S3 buckets, they have nothing else in their environment. It's enough for them to just use the API, build some automation, and just identify all the open buckets once in a while or continuously. And that is one option. Another option is to use open source, right? We have plenty of amazing open source tools from Netflix, from Cloud Custodian, and others that can be used to identify misconfigured assets. The next way to implement some CSPM program is using native tools. What I've seen is that companies start with native tools, and over time they decide that they need more, and then they move to the next level. But native tools can be a really good starting point as well. Security hubs, Azure Security Center, Sentinel, and others. And of course, the off-shelf products, some of which me and Shira know very intimately. And yeah, Shira, what do you think about the CSPM products? What would be the right approach there? How do you even look at those?
So what you said before is something I totally agree with. The answer is it depends. It depends on each company and each cloud environment and the maturity of the cloud journey for that specific company, because some companies are small and only using one cloud vendor and have a very basic architecture. So they don't really have a need for a very complicated and complex and filled with feature kind of product, because they're not going to use those features. I think that generally speaking, open source is a good start if you want to get to the low-hanging fruits, or if you want to prevent other people from getting to your low-hanging fruits. But this doesn't last for long. In the long run, you probably need a more robust solution, or to take the open source and build something on top of that. Unfortunately, there isn't one specific product that is going to do everything for us, because as you said before, posture has so many different aspects. One of them was visibility that you mentioned, and the misconfiguration that you mentioned. And those things require different products. It gets even more complicated when you have several cloud vendors. Even though those products are trying to do well with multi-cloud environments, this is still a struggle, because with each company, the security model looks a little different. So even if you're mature enough to go and choose a product, you need to think carefully about your needs and find the right product for you, because maybe you don't need all of their features. You just need very specific features to make sure that you have a good posture, that you're compliant, that you're aware of security risks that are relevant to you. So the short answer is, it depends.
So I could have spoken about CSPM maturity model for another hour, but I will not, do it here, because we have limited time, and I want to let Shira to talk a little bit more about IAM. But just to give you another tool that can maybe, hopefully, make your life a little bit easier. I thought about CSPM maturity model and how companies can evaluate where they are today, and define where they want to go, and then create a plan. And what are those criteria? What are those important components of CSPM they need to cover in order to get there? So there will be a link in the chat window that has the actual white paper that I wrote about this topic, that you can review at your own time. But basically, CSPM process is about, selecting the tool, configuring the tool properly, making sure that on an ongoing basis, you're adjusting those policies to your environments, making sure that you automate the stuff that can be automated, making a good process around escalations and prioritizations, and measuring yourself. If you cannot measure yourself, you cannot implement anything, any process of maturity. So if you want to start thinking about CSPM and bring yourself to the next level, start with, defining what the success would look like first, and improve over time. It can be small improvements, everyday incremental improvements. You don't have to fix all the misconfigurations you identified. What you have to do is to define what are your top priorities, and gradually making sure that you're addressing them one after another. So this maturity model is going to evolve. I'm sure that as I'm speaking to more people, as people starting to implement that, we will update it on an ongoing basis. But if you want more details, I'm sure that this blog that was published can help you with some details. And if not, just reach out.
The blog is available on the chat right now. So feel free to copy and save that URL for later.
Cool. So Shira, what do you think the IAM, what role IAM is playing in this CSPM domain, and how would you approach the IAM as part of the CSPM maturity?
I think that adopting a good and clean IAM practices can be a very good solution to, I will never say all of our security problems, but definitely many of them that has to do with sensitive data that we don't want people or other cloud assets to have access to, and also to keep other identities of assets and users with only the necessary access that they need and the necessary actions we would like them to execute. We don't want other entitlements and other identities being able to, for example, create another user, and in that way create persistency in our account, because that user would look legitimate, and it's going to take us a lot of time and efforts to find an illegitimate user that was created by another resource. So making sure that only the necessary actions and the necessary resources have access to one another is very, very important. As we said before, cloud vendors created this mechanism for us to help us keep our data and resources with only the necessary access. It's very granular, it's very accurate, it's free to use, but it's also very complicated. I wish it was as simple as we're talking about it. People are still struggling with good implementation of this, and the best example is that we see with our users today about 85% of excessive permissions in the average AWS account. So that means when people are actually granting IAM permissions, thinking that they're doing their job right, they're actually creating a huge attack surface for that organization. Because they're really trying their best, but you have so many hands touching IAM that this is the result. You have one developer who wants to run fast, doesn't want security to hold them back, giving a wildcard in one of their permissions. Nobody fixes that along the way. And this is how your application makes it to production with admin permissions without anyone noticing that. So, by the way, one of the reasons we see that is because there is a huge talent shortage in the security industry. We talk about it a lot. We say shift security left. Basically, we're saying, listen, we need more people to do security, but we don't have more people. So let's tell developers that security is their job. And of course, we always like to say that security is everyone's job. But at the end of the day, the developer's job is to develop. They're trying to do security, but it's not their job. They don't have the right skill set to do that. Sometimes they don't have the right knowledge to do that. And this is how those mistakes happen. So if we were granted with this really good security mechanism, but we fail at implementing it, is it good or bad for compliance? Or what should we do about it to make it a superpower and not something that's holding us back? Let's take a look. There are a bunch of things that we expect CSPM products. Sometimes some of these functionalities are also found in CIEM products, but we're expecting certain things from them. Marina mentioned, I think, Marina, in one way or another, you mentioned everything we see on the screen right now. We expect those products to tell us what is happening in our account. We want them to tell us what kind of cloud assets do we have. We want them to tell us not only the visibility into the inventory, but also visibility into the permission model, into the kinds of access we have in our account. We want them to do two important things: to help us prevent security issues and help us remediate if things happen this way and we have some kind of security incident. When they do those two things, they really help us with security effectiveness. Security should help us and not hold us back. Security should help us to deliver faster to production and not hold us back in delivering the next feature, because we need to run 10 more tests and the feature will be deployed next week. So if we do prevention the right way, it's going to save us a lot of time that in the past we used to waste in security testing and in finding security issues in production that makes us stop everything and go back to fix them. A few other things that we expect those products to give us is a proof of compliance. We talked about compliance, and Marina recommended us to start with a more detailed frameworks. But usually we will meet an auditor at some point in this journey, and they're going to ask us to gather lots of proofs and prove to them that we don't have excessive access, that the data is well protected, that I did not grant access to users who don't need that kind of access. And just looking for these proofs, taking screenshots, sending them to the auditor. Marina, I think you did it, I don't know, dozens of times. Does that make any sense?
My favorite job as an auditor was to try and automate stuff, so I don't need to take all of these screenshots, because grabbing attachments and putting them in the spreadsheet and then updating them every quarter for each company, 30 samples for each type of business or a system is painful.
Yeah. Governance, because we want to help the infrastructure team and the security team work well together and be able to enforce those policies or regulations. And the last thing, and I would say even, we're keeping the best for last, the ease of use. A product should be very, very simple to use. If onboarding is taking you, I don't know, more than 3 minutes, then some product manager did not do their job. Because we don't want to waste our time. We have so many people touching our cloud infrastructure, from the developers to the DevOps to the infra and to the security team. They all have to work together. So the product has to be really simple. The input should be very simple. The output should be very simple. It should be very clear to me, what am I getting out of this product and how to implement it. And this is what we expect today from security products in general, and specifically from security products that are supposed to help us to be more compliant. And in a minute, you're actually going to see how it works with our new feature, with Solvo's compliance feature that is being launched today. If any one of you wants to try it out, you have the link here in this slide and also on the chat. I said that these products should be very, very easy to use, and we believe in that. So you will see for yourself that onboarding to Solvo takes 1 minute, and within a few minutes, you'll be able, within a couple of minutes of loading the page, you will already be able to see your cloud assets and their risk score. But why listen to me when you can just see it for yourself in our console? So right now, what you see on the screen is our compliance status of the accounts that I have here in my console. This is our dashboard that gives us a general overview for the different accounts that I have here. In this console, I've connected 5 different AWS accounts, and they're sorted by the level of risk or how not compliant they are. And I can see that my demo account is the least compliant, and my staging account is quite compliant. I'm very happy to see that. In addition, I have a general idea about the risk status and how many rules of compliance have passed or failed. We also have an overview about the different frameworks that we are running in this compliance test. But I actually want to show you how we got to this status page, how I set it up, and how easy it is. So I'm just going to delete everything you see on the screen right now as if it never happened. And I'm going to rerun this security audit. Right. So this is my page where I choose the specific rules I want to test against my AWS account or a few AWS accounts. We've pre-created different rules for different frameworks that Marina mentioned, for example, SOC 2 or ISO or GDPR, and quite soon you'll be able to upload the rules that you care about. You can choose a few, you can choose all, you can cherry pick between each bundle the ones that you care about. It works either way. In this case, I will just select all of them. I will give it the bundle a name. Shira and Marina. And the description, it's very descriptive. I'm going to choose all of my accounts because I want to show you how quickly it takes to get the results. Marina mentioned before that excluding is also important for compliance because not all rules are relevant to all of our cloud assets. So I could have added here a few exclusions, but I'm not going to do it right now. And this is a summary of this compliance audit that I'm going to run right now. And I've activated this bundle. And in just one moment, we're going to see the same dashboard that you saw just a moment ago with the new results. I don't expect any new results right now. And here it is still loading some of the things because right now I can see that we ran 8 out of 90 rules. But if I refresh my screen, I'm going to see 90 or close to 90 rules that are waiting to be reviewed. So it only takes a couple of minutes to understand the security status and the compliance status of my account. And if I just scroll down over here, I can see the list of rules that I have activated and applied on my accounts. I can start off by seeing the ones that failed and also the severity that they present. The severity is something that we set up, but as a user, you can change that depending on how you see this kind of severity. Of course, I would like to start by fixing the most critical findings. Now, the important thing to know about those rules that we are running, there are many different security products that the basic thing they do is go over the security policy and look for the more low-hanging fruits, I would say, looking for the wildcards, but they're unable to look at the other security mechanisms that we have. They're unable to look at the ACLs, for example, and they're unable to understand the full access picture in this account. And the reason why the Solvo compliance mechanism is different is because we base it on our deep analysis of the permission model. I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a moment because a visual image always makes it more clear. So in this case, I'm going to look for a nice finding. For example, S3 bucket is publicly listable. It means that someone from the internet can run a list API call or a query and find this bucket. This rule had failed. It means that I have a bucket here that you can list from the internet. It's happening in my demo account. And if I open this dropdown, I can see the buckets that actually failed and that I might want to fix. For example, I can see that I have a bucket named Door Receipts. Door is our security researcher, and he did this on purpose, of course, in the demo account. But now what I would actually like to do is understand the security posture of this specific bucket. And I said before that sometimes a visual image makes it a lot more clear. Let's see how this happen, that we can get access to this bucket from the internet, I just switch tabs and move to the IAM magnifier feature, which is our visibility feature. And I would like to take a look at the demo account. And I would like to specifically check for the S3 bucket resource. I remember its name. It's called door receipt. And I'm going to take a look at the security permission model of this specific bucket. Right now, I care about listing action, the list action from the internet. So I will add a filter of anonymous access. And I can see that this bucket, what it means is that this bucket is accessible from the internet. For the list action and probably for a few more actions, I just look for all access levels. So there are probably other actions that can be executed on this bucket. It's not a best practice. By the way, if you want to know more about the different access that we have for this bucket, we can always add here in the filters. For example, I want to know which users have access to this bucket. So it's not a problem. I just click it here and I can see that I have a couple of users using the administrator access, and they have the access to this bucket. So understanding the security permission model for AWS cloud assets is complicated, but we can make your life easier. After you understand the security permission model, another thing that Solvo does for you is creating the fix or the alternative security permission. Yes, this is a remediation, but by enforcing Solvo or connecting to Solvo earlier in your software lifecycle, you can actually do it in a preventative mode. You can use Solvo to prevent security issues by enforcing good security permissions early at the development of your product and not waiting to find leaky buckets in your production environment. So at this point, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take a look at the questions that we got asked, Marina. Let's see, I have here a few questions. So can you elaborate about the importance of IAM controls in audit and compliance efforts?
Absolutely. So, each compliance assessment or program has a huge section or requirement around access permissions. One of the most simple to explain and much more harder to implement is, the least privilege principle. And that's the baseline of any regulatory requirement. And basically what it says is that each one of the employees of the companies need to have permissions that are necessary to do their job. Now, it's on the company to first identify what is necessary for each employee, and B, identify those excessive permissions and remove them. So some of the controls in order to get to this state are around access reviews, and access reviews are very manual and not efficient way to implement that principle. And basically what access reviews are doing is that managers getting lists of all of their employees, all of the permissions of their employees, reviewing them and signing up that it's valid. Most of the managers have no clue what the IAM policies are. What does that star in one of the actions mean? And they just signing up because they assume that since their employees are doing what they need to do, they have the right permissions. So a very important role of IAM in compliance efforts, and part of the reasons why compliance programs fail and they are not helping to protect the company is that reason of a very inefficient way of implementing those controls.
Yeah, So this is why sometimes we need external tools to help us understand the current IAM posture, and also for the future to implement a least privileged one, preferably automatically or at least semi-automatically, so that we'll have some other, virtual assistant to tell us what is the right security configuration for each entitlement. It can be a user or it can be a cloud asset. We have another question. Do CSPM products help us with compliance?
Absolutely. They even if they, not necessarily show the references to compliance sections, and if they do, they definitely help with a lot of documentation and continuous compliance processes. I think the CSPM terminology was born after we started doing compliance in the cloud. So definitely they are heavily related. Not everything that we are doing for posture management relevant for compliance, and not everything we are doing for compliance is relevant for cloud posture, but they have a huge overlap.
Yep, agreed. We have another question here. I think you may have answered it, but it's a good opportunity to maybe answer that again. Give us one important tip for security practitioners who want to become compliant in the cloud.
I would not repeat myself about that slide on NDCIS, but I would say know what's in scope. You don't have to implement PCI for your entire environment if your credit card information is only stored in one VPC. It's important to identify which sets of controls are relevant where to reduce your scope. You don't have to do it all. And the more well-defined your scope is, the easier for you is to manage this whole operation.
Yep, absolutely. The last question we have here is this solution, the Solvo solution, relevant for other cloud providers? So the answer is yes, it's relevant to AWS, it's relevant to Azure, and it will be relevant to other popular cloud vendors in the coming months. So I think that's it. And we actually managed to finish right on time. So Marina, I would like to thank you again for joining us today. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Today we had a little more audience than the usual. So I look forward for our next conversation. I wish you and Tamnun much success. I look forward for you to come out of stealth and to share with everyone the great things that you're doing. Thank you everyone who joined us. We will send you a copy of this session so you'll be able to watch it over and over again.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.